The morning began as always calm, polite, and scented faintly of toast. Lady Bantry sat at her breakfast table, trimming the edges of the newspaper, when she noticed something curious in the teapot. Tiny grey flecks drifted through the amber liquid, swirling like storm clouds. She frowned. "Cook's forgotten to rinse it again," she muttered. But when she poured the tea into her cup, one flake clung to the surface. Paper, not soot. She fished it out with the tip of her spoon. The edge was burned black, the center still faintly lined. 3 words showed through the stain: "Before it happens again." Lady Bantry stared. A letter fragment, burned deliberately. She set down the cup and called sharply, "Arthur, the tea's full of ashes." Her husband appeared in the doorway, spectacles in hand, expression half curious, half alarmed. "Ashes?" "Yes. From paper, not coal." He peered into the pot, then shrugged. "Some kitchen mishap, I dare say." But she shook her head. "There's writing. Look." He leaned closer, saw the faint ink, and straightened at once. "I'll fetch Miss Marple. She enjoys this sort of thing." Half an hour later, Miss Marple arrived, hat neat, eyes alert. She examined the paper under the breakfast lamp. "Not ordinary ink," she murmured. "Fountain pen, heavy nib. Someone wrote in haste." She turned the fragment carefully with her knitting needle. "The edges are burned outward, not inward. The fire consumed it on the grate, not inside the pot. It drifted here afterward." Lady Bantry looked bewildered. "Then someone threw it into the fireplace." "More likely," Marple said softly. "Someone tried to destroy it, and a piece escaped." She studied the letters again, the slanting strokes, the bold curve of the B. Recognition flickered across her face, quick and unsettling. Lady Bantry noticed. "Jane, you've seen that handwriting before." Marple didn't. "Answer at once." She laid the fragment flat, eyes narrowing. The loop on the G dipped too low, the cross on the T too firm. Yes. There was no mistake. She folded the scrap into her handkerchief and looked toward the cold fireplace. "Tell me, Dolly," she asked quietly, "who used this room last night?" Lady Bantry hesitated. "Only the vicar. He stopped in for tea after the meeting." Miss Marple nodded slowly, eyes still on the grate. "Then perhaps," she said, "we should see what else your fire decided not to burn." The clock ticked. A small curl of grey ash fell onto the hearth. The handwriting, Marple knew, was familiar. The morning fire had long gone out when Miss Marple knelt before the grate. Lady Bantry stood nearby, clutching her shawl as though the quiet room had turned suddenly colder. Ash and half-burnt cinders filled the hearth. A faint smell of scorched paper still lingered. Miss Marple lifted the poker, stirring gently through the grey remains. Every movement released a soft puff of dust, the ghost of something written, now gone. "Careful, Jane," Lady Bantry murmured. "I am always careful, my dear," Marple replied, her eyes fixed on the blackened pile. Something white gleamed beneath the grate, wedged where the coals had not reached. She used the tongs to draw it out. A half-burned sheet, edges curled like old lace. The upper portion gone entirely. The lower half bore 2 lines still legible through the smoke. "You must destroy it completely. Nothing left." Below, a signature, nothing more than a single dash and 1 letter. A. Lady Bantry gasped. "Anonymous?" Marple shook her head. "No, signed but with care. Someone wanted to appear as no one at all." She turned the fragment over. On the back, faint traces of wax clung to the corner, dark crimson, brittle with heat. She rubbed it between her fingers. "Sealing wax," she said softly. "But not the brown or blue one finds for personal letters. This is church red, the sort used on parish notices and choir certificates." Lady Bantry looked startled. "You mean from the vicarage?" "Perhaps. Or anyone with access to the vestry cupboard." Marple studied the grate again. Burned scraps of envelope clung to the edges, one corner stamped with a faint watermark. "Crown Bond, 1,928. Quality paper. Not common." Someone had chosen their materials with care, then destroyed them in haste. "Dolly," she said quietly, "who lit this fire?" "The maid. First thing. She said the ashes were already cold." Then whoever burned this did so in the night. Marple leaned closer. Her eyes caught a faint shine on the brass fender, a smear, circular, crimson at its center. She pressed a fingertip to it, then lifted it to the light. Wax again melted, not dripped, as though a seal had been pressed against hot metal. Lady Bantry watched her friend with growing unease. "Jane, what does it mean?" "It means," Marple said slowly, "someone used this room to destroy evidence. But evidence of what? That remains to be seen." She folded the half-letter carefully into her handkerchief. When she rose, her knees cracked softly, but her eyes were sharp as ever. "May I trouble you for your magnifying glass?" she asked. Lady Bantry fetched it from the writing desk. Marple examined the wax trace again under the lens. Embedded in the center was a tiny flake of gold leaf hardly visible to the naked eye. Her expression changed a quiet tightening of thought. Gold leaf, used in embossed church seals. She looked up. "Dolly," she said, "we must pay the vicar a visit before this wax grows cold." The clock on the mantel chimed once. The echo faded into the hush of the room. On the hearth a single ember stirred, glowed red, and died. Miss Marple's eyes stayed on it, same red as the church seal. The postman arrived late that morning, his boots, leaving damp prints on the tiled floor of Gossington Hall. He tipped his cap politely to Lady Bantry and Miss Marple, who were waiting in the hall. "Morning, ma'am. Only 2 for you today. Parish notice, and a seed catalogue." Lady Bantry accepted them absently. "Thank you, Mr. Hales. Tell me, was there any outgoing post from here yesterday?" He looked puzzled. "No, ma'am. None collected." "Are you certain? No envelope left on the tray? No stamped letter?" "Certain as rain," he said. "I checked the brass box myself every morning. Empty yesterday. Empty again today." Miss Marple's gaze moved to the writing desk by the window. The blotter still bore a faint smear of ink, fresh enough to glisten in the light. The pen beside it had been cleaned, too carefully. She stepped closer. "You collect from the hall at what time, Mr. Hales?" 5:30, ma'am. Same as always. And after that hour, any letter left here would not be taken until the morning." "That's right, Miss Marple." She nodded. "Then our burned letter could not have gone by post at all." The postman frowned. "Beg pardon?" "Never mind, Mr. Hales. You've been most helpful." When he'd gone, the silence that followed seemed heavier. Lady Bantry folded her hands tightly. "So it wasn't sent. It was written here, and then destroyed." "Quite so," Marple murmured. "The question becomes by whom?" They walked toward the breakfast room, where the remains of the morning's tea still waited. The air smelled faintly of smoke, though the windows stood open. Marple examined the ashpan near the fireplace. Grey flakes, yes, but beneath them, a scrap of blue ribbon, half melted. "Ribbon from a stationery bundle," she said quietly. "Your own." Lady Bantry blinked. "Mine. But those are in the drawer by the telephone." Marple crossed to the side table. The drawer indeed stood ajar, one spool missing, a neat, to little gap. She closed it gently, eyes thoughtful. "Your writing desk faces the fire, does it not?" "Yes." "Then whoever wrote that letter sat exactly where you're standing." Lady Bantry's voice dropped. "But Jane, who would dare?" Marple's tone stayed mild. "Anyone who had reason to hide what they'd written and knew no one would question ashes in your grate." She folded the burnt half-letter from her pocket once more, tracing the slant of the signature. Her expression was calm, but her eyes held certainty. "It wasn't posted," she said softly. "It never left this house." She looked up at her friend. "Because, my dear Dolly, someone in this house wrote it." The hall clock struck 11. Each chime seemed louder than the last, and somewhere upstairs a door closed quietly, but not by accident. The housemaid, Ellen Briggs, stood in the doorway of the morning room, her cap slightly askew, her hands red from scrubbing. She was young, quick-eyed, and plainly nervous. Miss Marple, seated near the window, looked up from her knitting with a gentle smile. "Come in, my dear. We won't bite." Ellen hesitated, then stepped forward, twisting the corner of her apron. "I was told you wished to speak to me, ma'am." Lady Bantry nodded. "Yes, Ellen. It's about the ashes from the fireplace yesterday. You emptied them rather early, didn't you? Yes, ma'am. Before breakfast. I do it most mornings. Where did you take them? To the bin by the orchard wall. Miss Marple spoke softly, her voice kind but probing. And was the fire already out when you cleared it? Oh, yes, ma'am. Quite cold, I checked, but... She hesitated. There was paper in it that didn't look like our usual rubbish. I thought maybe Cook had burned something from the kitchen. Did you? Marple asked. Ellen shook her head quickly. No, ma'am. I swear I didn't burn anything that wasn't mine. The ashes, they weren't from here. Lady Bantry exchanged a glance with Miss Marple. Not from here? And yet you cleared them from this very grate. Ellen's throat worked. I think someone else must have used the fire during the night. Someone else? Marple prompted. I heard the front room door close about midnight. Thought it was the wind. Maybe it wasn't. She rubbed her wrist nervously, and Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught the motion. The skin there was reddened, a small blister swelling at the edge. You've hurt yourself, my dear. Oh, it's nothing, ma'am. Just the poker slipped when I stirred the coals this morning. Hot poker, Marple said mildly. But the fire was cold, you said. Ellen froze, colour rising to her cheeks. I meant when I lit it again. I must have brushed against it. Marple let the silence hang. Lady Bantry folded her arms. You'd best tell us the truth, Ellen. No one's cross with you, but the truth matters. The girl looked down. I only wanted it tidy before you came down, ma'am. There was half-burned paper everywhere. I swept it up. The ash pan was full. I thought it looked untidy, that's all. She paused, biting her lip. And the paper, it looked like a letter. Part of it had wax on the corner. Red wax. Miss Marple's tone didn't change. Did you touch that wax, Ellen? The girl shook her head. No, ma'am. I threw everything into the bin. Marple nodded slowly. Then you've been very thorough indeed. She rose, stepped close, and brushed a fingertip over the maid's sleeve. Something clung there, a faint, glossy speck no bigger than a pinhead. Red. Church red. Marple lifted it to the light. Ah, she murmured, so tidy a fire, and yet one ember travelled. Ellen's eyes widened, terrified now. What do you mean, ma'am? Marple smiled faintly, kindly. Only that. Some ashes, my dear, refuse to stay where they're put. She folded the speck into her handkerchief. Behind her, the hall clock struck noon steady, solemn, unhurried. Ellen flinched at the sound. Miss Marple looked up toward the landing. The faint smell of wax lingered there, drifting down from above. And on the stair carpet a single red flake waited, catching the light. Reverend Clement was not a man easily startled. Years of parish troubles and flower committee disputes had steeled him against most earthly surprises. Yet when the morning post arrived, even he hesitated. The envelope had no stamp, no postmark, no return address, just his name, written in a steady, confident hand, Reverend Leonard Clement. The vicar turned it over. The flap was sealed with red wax deep crimson, pressed flat by a plain circle. No crest, no monogram, only the faint impression of something round, like the base of a bottle rather than a seal. He frowned. Odd. The same red as the parish wax used for choir certificates. He broke it carefully and unfolded the single sheet inside. Blank. Not a word, not even an initial. He held it up to the light by the window. Still nothing. The paper was thick, good quality, like that used for formal correspondence. He was still staring at it when Miss Marple arrived. She entered through the churchyard gate, her hat tilted against the wind, knitting bag swinging from her arm. The vicar looked relieved to see her. Ah, Miss Marple, you appear just in time. Would you explain this to me? He handed her the envelope. She examined it with quiet care. Red wax again, the same dark shade she had seen on Lady Bantry's hearth. The same faint scent of smoke. When did this come? Just after breakfast. The postman swears it wasn't in his bag. Someone must have slipped it through the vestry door. Marple nodded. And it bears the same hand. Same hand? Yes. The same firm downstroke on the A. I've seen it before. She unfolded the paper. Blank, she murmured. The vicar sighed. An empty prank, then? Not necessarily. She moved closer to the fire. Holding the sheet near the flame, she watched the surface darken slightly. For a moment, nothing. Then faint lines began to appear, brown and trembling. The vicar leaned forward. Good heavens! The letters formed slowly, as though summoned from the air itself. Stop her before Thursday. Miss Marple lowered the sheet, eyes narrowing. Invisible ink, the simplest kind, made from lemon juice. Whoever wrote this knew exactly what they were doing. Thursday, the vicar repeated. That's tomorrow. Stop whom? Marple's gaze stayed on the message. I can't yet say, but whoever wrote this wanted you warned quietly without record. She folded the paper, replaced it in the envelope, and handed it back. Keep this somewhere safe, Reverend, and please tell no one you received it. He nodded, bewildered. Do you believe it's connected to the Bantry fire? I believe, she said softly, it's part of the same chain. A gust of wind stirred the curtains. The fire crackled, throwing red light across her face. The faint wax seal lay on the mantel where she had set it, gleaming darkly, like blood in the glow. Miss Marple turned toward the window. Outside, the church bell swayed in the breeze, unmoving, soundless, and on the paper by the hearth, the hidden ink still glowed faintly, as though the warning wasn't finished yet. The faint brown letters shimmered against the cream paper, ghostly and uneven. Stop her before Thursday. Miss Marple read the line twice, her lips barely moving. No name, no signature, just that urgent, unfinished warning. The vicar stood beside her, spectacles halfway down his nose, as though hoping a third reading might reveal the rest. It's nonsense, surely, he said. Stop whom? And before? What? Marple tilted the sheet to the light. It isn't nonsense, Reverend. It's intention. Someone risked much to write this. She laid the paper flat on the desk, studying every detail, the uneven burn from the flame, the thick fiber of the paper, the faint, oily trace along one edge. Lemon juice, she murmured. Heated too close to the fire. A simple household recipe for invisible ink, common in school pranks, and sometimes in secrets. The vicar frowned. You think this connects to the ashes at the Bantrys? I think the handwriting matches perfectly, she said. Same slant, same pressure on the downstroke. Then whoever wrote that burned letter wrote this too. Precisely. Marple's eyes flicked to the wax still clinging to the envelope. Church read again. Whoever sealed it used your own supply, Reverend. He looked genuinely shocked. But the vestry wax is kept locked away. Locks are easily borrowed when the key is left on its hook. The vicar rubbed his temple. But why send a warning? And to me of all people? Marple smiled faintly. Because you are trusted. In street. Mary Mead, anything delivered to you seems official. She took the envelope, turning it over thoughtfully. No stamp, no postmark, no address but yours. It was hand-delivered by someone who wished to appear unseen. He gave a small sigh. We are adrift in riddles. Yes, she said, but riddles have answers, Reverend. We only need to listen for them. She rose, tucking the envelope neatly into her handbag. Outside the study, the wind had begun to stir the churchyard trees, scattering petals from the spring blossoms. Miss Marple paused at the vestry door, glancing at the notice board. Pinned neatly beneath the schedule of services was a new announcement typed, unsigned, with a red wax seal at the corner. Choir rehearsal cancelled Thursday evening. Her eyes narrowed. Curious, she murmured. The choir always meets on Thursday, and the vicar has said nothing about cancelling. She peeled the notice slightly from the board. The same heavy paper, the same faint scent of lemon and smoke, the same hand. Miss Marple folded the notice, slipped it into her bag beside the letter, and turned toward the church gate. Lady Bantry was waiting there, anxious, her scarf pulled tight against the wind. Well? She asked. Was it a warning? Yes, Marple said. and one we may already be too late to heed." Lady Bantry's face paled. "Too late?" Marple looked down the lane where the road curved toward the village. Beyond the hedge, the bell tower rose against the sky, its shadow long and sharp. "Thursday," she said quietly. "That's tomorrow." The wind lifted the papers in her hand, and the words, "Stop her before Thursday," flickered once more in the light before the ink faded completely, as though the message itself feared what tomorrow would bring. The little shop on the corner of Market Street smelled of ink, paper, and peppermint. Miss Marple liked such places tidy, innocent, full of quiet observation. The girl behind the counter, Ivy Reeve, looked up as the bell jingled. She couldn't have been more than 19, with quick hands and eyes too sharp for her age. "Good morning, Miss Marple," she said. "Looking for your usual envelopes?" "Not today, my dear," Marple replied kindly. "I've come to ask a small favor. You sell sealing wax, don't you?" Ivy nodded and pointed to the glass case by the till. "Here, ma'am. Red, blue, and black. The red's nearly gone, only 2 sticks left." Marple's brows lifted. "A popular color." "Yes, sold almost the whole box last week. A gentleman came in, took 4 sticks. Said he preferred the old-fashioned kind." Marple leaned gently on the counter. "Would you remember him, perhaps?" The girl thought for a moment, tapping her pencil against her chin. "Well, yes, actually. Hard to forget him. He had a limp right leg, I think. Walked with a bit of a swing." "Older man?" "Not really. Maybe 40. Smart coat, but worn at the collar. And gloves. Brown leather. Soft kind. Only what, my dear?" "The left one was torn at the thumb. I remember because he tried to hide it. I offered him twine for the package, and he took it with his other hand." Marple's smile was small but approving. "You have a good memory, Ivy. Did he say where he was from?" "No, ma'am. He paid in coins, half-crowns and shillings mixed. Voice sounded like London, not local." The girl bent to fetch a fresh stick of sealing wax, wrapped it neatly, and handed it across. Marple slipped it into her handbag, though her thoughts were far away. A gentleman with a limp, red sealing wax, torn glove, and yesterday's mysterious warning sealed in church red. "Thank you, Miss Reeve," she said softly. "You've been most helpful. If you remember anything else, I'll tell Constable Polk," the girl promised. "Or you, if you pass by." Marple smiled and stepped into the street. The air smelled of rain and coal smoke. She paused outside the shop, considering the facts. A limp, a glove, church wax. Someone in the village, or just beyond, had gone to trouble to appear ordinary. At the vicarage gate, she stopped. A small flutter of movement caught her eye, something dark, half buried in the hedge. She reached through the branches and drew it out. A glove, brown leather, left hand. The thumb split open. Lady Bantry arrived at that very moment, breathless from the lane. "Jane, you look as if you found something dreadful." Miss Marple held up the glove by 2 fingers. "Not dreadful, my dear," she said quietly, "but very curious indeed." She turned it over, and there, pressed into the soft leather near the wrist, was a bati, faint trace of red wax, the same shade as the church seal. The wind stirred the hedge, carrying the faint toll of the church bell across the field. Miss Marple looked toward the tower. "Whoever lost this," she murmured, "was standing right here, watching the vicarage." She folded the glove into her handkerchief, eyes narrowing on the lane beyond. For in the ditch near the hedge, the mud still bore the mark of a single footprint, the heavy, uneven print of a man who walked with a limp. Constable Polk crouched beside the vicarage hedge, his measuring tape stretched across the damp soil. He was a broad man with a kind face, and a tendency to speak his thoughts aloud. "Strange business, this," he muttered, squinting at the ground. 2 different sets, plain as day, and not the same kind of boots, either. Miss Marple stood behind him, her gloved hands folded neatly over her handbag. Lady Bantry hovered nearby, trying not to step on anything useful. The early afternoon light slanted low, showing each indentation clearly in the soft earth. "Let's see now," Polk said, marking the first print with a stick. "Small, narrow sole, high heel, I'd say a lady's shoe." He measured again, adjusting the tape. "Size 4, maybe 5. And the second? Marple asked. He moved a few feet further down the hedge. Heavier, flat sole, heel worn on one side. That'd be a man's and not a light one either. Lady Bantry shivered. Then two people met here? Polk nodded. Seems that way. Look, her prints come from the garden path, his from the lane. They stop here side by side, then turn back separately. Marple leaned closer, eyes tracing the pattern. The woman's prints overlapped one of the man's, faint but clear. She arrived after him, Marple murmured. How do you know? Lady Bantry asked. The fresher imprint always breaks the older one at the edge, Marple replied. The soil was softer. Last night. Rain after midnight, remember? The constable grunted, impressed. Sharp eyes, Miss Marple. She smiled faintly. Just an old habit, constable. People leave stories in mud as easily as in ink. Polk picked up the brown glove she had found earlier. Man's glove, all right, he said. Left hand. Fine leather. Bit torn at the thumb. Not local, make foreign stitching. He turned it over. But what's this? Red wax. Marple nodded. From the church seal. We've seen it before. He frowned, glancing again at the woman's footprints. So a man with red wax on his glove met a lady here, under the hedge, in the middle of the night. Exactly so, Marple said softly. And one of them wrote a letter warning the vicar to stop her before Thursday. Lady Bantry blinked. Stop her? But which of them is her? That, said Marple, we must discover quickly. The constable stood, brushing off his knees. I'll take casts of the prints. Might match someone's shoes. Do, Marple said, and ask discreetly who owns a pair of high-heeled walking shoes recently cleaned. She glanced down once more. One of the smaller footprints held a perfect crescent mark, the rim of a bicycle pedal pressed faintly into the soil. The same pattern she had once seen near the Bantry gate. Her expression hardened. Two people met here last night, she said quietly. One arrived on foot. The other rode a bicycle. The constable followed her gaze down the lane where the wind stirred the grass by the ditch. In the distance, a faint metallic glint caught the sun the edge of a wheel, half hidden among nettles. Marple's eyes fixed on it, sharp as glass. For just beyond the hedge, the bicycle lay waiting, its chain broken, its seat smeared faintly with red wax. The library at Gossington Hall was seldom used in the mornings. Its long curtains were drawn half shut, and the air held the quiet, chill of old books and forgotten evenings. Miss Marple entered softly, the faintest smell of soot still clinging to the air. Lady Bantry followed, holding a small candle stub. Cook said the window wouldn't close last night, she explained. Thought perhaps the wood had swollen. Marple nodded. Or perhaps someone didn't wish it to close. She moved toward the far wall, where the tall window faced the orchard. Soot streaks marked the brass latch, faint but definite. Someone had handled it with unclean hands. Miss Marple bent closer. The soot wasn't from the fireplace. It was oily, mixed with a thin smear of wax. From a candle, she murmured. She touched the lock, felt the slight looseness of the mechanism. This latch was opened from outside. See? The metal's worn where a thin blade lifted it. Lady Bantry looked alarmed. A knife? Or perhaps a letter opener, Marple said mildly. Someone skilled, quiet, careful. Not a burglar, a visitor who preferred not to knock. She examined the still faint impressions of fingers in the dust. And see here, one spot clean where a hand rested to steady itself. Whoever entered climbed in gently, not forced. Lady Bantry's voice dropped. But why through the window? The door wasn't locked. Because the visitor wished to leave no trace of entry. Except, of course, soot and wax never keep secrets. Inside, the room told its own small story. The air carried a faint tang candle grease and warm paper. Someone had lit a taper here recently, long after the household had gone to bed. The writing desk bore no new letters, but Marple noticed the ashtray had been cleaned. She lifted it. A small smear of black remained at the edge, the faint curve of something once burned. She glanced to the fireplace, cold, untouched. Someone brought flame, she said quietly, but not for light, for destruction. Lady Bantry shuddered. You mean they burned something here? Marple nodded. Perhaps what was missing from the grate. The remainder of that letter, maybe more. She moved across the rug, careful where she stepped. The carpet fibers were singed in a single place, near the foot of the desk, not by dropped ash, by heat pressed against cloth. She bent down, parting the fibers with a knitting needle she'd borrowed from her bag. Something small and blackened caught the light. Marple lifted it delicately between her fingers. A scrap of photographic paper, curled at the corner, half burned. On its untouched edge, the faint outline of a woman's face. Young, smiling. Lady Bantry drew in her breath. "Who is it?" Marple turned the fragment slightly, watching the expression change under shadow. "I can't yet say," she murmured. But whoever she was, someone wished her forgotten. She placed the singed scrap on the blotter. The image shimmered faintly in the candle glow. A cheek, a strand of hair, the trace of a collar pin. Marple's eyes narrowed. This photograph was part of a group, and I dare say we'll find the rest soon enough. The curtain stirred suddenly, though no window was open. A faint draught, carrying with it the smell of smoke and iron. Lady Bantry's hand flew to her throat. "Jane, what is that?" Marple didn't answer. She stared down at the fragment. On the back of the photograph, barely visible through the scorch, were 3 penciled letters, A-F-H. She straightened slowly, her voice a whisper. Someone burned a memory in this room. Her gaze shifted toward the window, where the glass reflected the orchard beyond, and a single figure moving away through the trees. Miss Marple stepped to the window just as the figure vanished, leaving only the faintest trail of soot on the outside latch and the burned smile of the woman in the photo staring up from the desk. By mid-afternoon, the small scrap of photograph from the Mead library rug had been carefully cleaned and flattened under glass. Miss Marple sat at the Bantry writing desk, the magnifying lens steady in her hand. Lady Bantry hovered beside her, a mixture of dread and curiosity written across her face. "You were quite right, Jane," she said quietly. "It was part of a larger picture." Marple nodded. "The paper edge matches the one from your family album. The heat only charred the border." Lady Bantry fetched the heavy leather album from the cabinet and opened it to a page labelled "Garden Party, 1915. Several photographs had faded with time, but one was missing entirely. The empty rectangle of glue still clung to the page. "Now," said Marple, sliding the fragment into place, "let's see who wished to erase a moment from the past." The image came alive again under the lamplight. 3 figures standing before the fountain at Gossington Hall. Lady Bantry, a younger version of herself, smiling stiffly at the camera. Beside her, a nurse in uniform, white apron, dark dress, cap at a precise angle, and next to them, a young man in khaki, shoulders square, his face turned partly away. Lady Bantry gasped softly. "Good heavens, I remember that day." "Who are they?" asked Marple. "The soldier, Lieutenant Henry Field, stayed here on convalescent leave during the war. The nurse Lydia Field, his sister. She came to tend him. We held a small garden fête for the hospital fund." Marple's eyes never left the photograph. "Field, yes. The same Lydia Field who vanished after the fire at the rectory cottage, did she not?" Lady Bantry nodded slowly. "Everyone believed she drowned crossing the weir. Her bicycle was found near the riverbank, but they never found her body." Marple leaned closer, her gaze drawn to a glint on the nurse's collar. "Her brooch," she murmured. "Silver, oval, with a small blue stone. She wore it even in uniform." "I'd forgotten it," Lady Bantry whispered. She said it was her mother's. The air in the room seemed to still. "So someone burned this photograph," Marple said quietly, "to remove her image or to hide the connection to her." "But after all these years," Lady Bantry said, "what could it matter now?" Miss Marple turned the fragment over again. The initials A.F.H. appeared clearer in the light. "Those letters," she said, "may yet tell us. Lydia Field was close to one Arthur Henry, wasn't she? The curate?" Lady Bantry looked startled. "Jane, you don't mean he married after she disappeared?" "Yes," Marple said softly. "He did." The grandfather clock in the hall struck 3, the chimes echoing through the quiet room. Marple replaced the photograph carefully in the album, her expression unreadable. At that moment, Ellen the maid appeared at the door, breathless. "Beg pardon, ma'am." Constable Polk sent word from the church. "Something found in the charity box said it might belong to you." Lady Bantry frowned. "To me? What is it?" The girl held out a small folded cloth. Inside lay a silver brooch oval, polished, set with a faint blue stone. Marple rose, eyes fixed on it. "Where exactly was this found?" "In the church box, ma'am, wrapped in brown paper. Left there this morning." The two women stared at the brooch in silence. It gleamed faintly under the lamplight, the metal unblemished, the pin unbroken. Miss Marple spoke at last, her tone very calm. "Then Lydia Field has returned to Street Mary Mead, or someone wishes us to believe she has." The maid shifted uneasily. "Should I take it back to the vicarage?" Marple shook her head. "No, my dear, not yet." She turned the brooch over in her palm and saw, on the clasp's underside, a thin smear of red wax. Lady Bantry gasped. "Jane." Marple looked toward the church spire beyond the window, its tip glinting in the late Sunday. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "That brooch was sealed shut this morning, by the same hand that burned the photograph. The church at Street. Mary Mead stood quiet that morning, sun streaming through its narrow windows, lighting dust like drifting gold. Miss Marple and Constable Polk moved softly through the aisle, their footsteps echoing between the pews. Lady Bantry followed, her eyes darting toward the pulpit, as though the building itself might be listening. The charity box stood beside the vestry door, small, oak, and firmly locked. A faint scent of polish and candle wax hung around it. Polk knelt, inspecting the slot at the top. "Looks untouched," he said. "But the brooch was inside, right enough. I took it out myself." Miss Marple nodded. "And the key?" "Belongs to Miss Price, the organist. She keeps it on a ring with her tuning fork. Won't even let the vicar handle it." "Then we'd best have a word," Marple murmured. They found Miss Price in the choir stalls, arranging hymn sheets with her usual brisk precision. A tall, spare woman, hair drawn into an uncompromising knot. She looked up sharply as they approached. "Good morning," she said, tone already defensive. "If it's about the music, we're quite prepared for Sunday." "It's not the hymns this time," Polk said kindly. "It's your charity box key, ma'am. We'd like to see it." Miss Price blinked. "My key? Whatever for?" "The box was opened without permission," Marple said gently. "Something valuable left inside." The organist frowned, fishing in her coat pocket. The small ring of keys jingled faintly. She turned them over once, then twice, and froze. "It's gone," she whispered. "I always keep it here. Always." "When did you last use it?" Marple asked. "Yesterday evening. I counted the pennies after practice, then locked it again. It must have fallen, or been borrowed," Marple said softly. Miss Price stiffened. "That's impossible. I lock the vestry after I leave. No one else enters." Marple's gaze shifted toward the side door. "And the key to that door?" "The vicar's," Miss Price said. "He keeps it in his desk." "Indeed," murmured Marple. "And anyone who's fetched a hymn list might know where." Constable Polk examined the box again. "No marks on the lock. Whoever opened it had the proper key, no doubt." Miss Price's face had grown pale. "Are you suggesting?" "No, my dear," Marple said kindly. "I suggest nothing, only that keys, like truth, have a way of being copied." They returned to the vestry. The air smelled faintly of polish and lavender, the vicar's old habit. On the desk lay hymn schedules, candle orders, and a small drawer left slightly ajar. Marple's eyes fell on the gleam inside. She drew it open with one finger. There, neatly placed on a square of velvet cloth, lay a single brass key identical in shape to the charity box lock. Its edges shone bright, as if freshly cleaned. Constable Polk whistled under his breath. "Duplicate," he said. Marple nodded, voice low. "And recently polished. See how the brasses on the desk are dull, yet this shines." Lady Bantry glanced around the quiet room. But who would polish a key meant to stay hidden? Marple turned it slowly in her hand. The light caught a faint smear on its teeth, red wax again. She closed her fingers over it. Someone who wished to be certain it turned smoothly, she said softly. From the chapel beyond came the faint echo of a single organ note, pressed by accident or intention. They all turned toward the sound, but the benches stood empty. Miss Marple looked back at the shining key in her palm. "Someone's been here," she murmured, "and they meant to come again." Evening light slanted across the churchyard as Miss Marple climbed the narrow stair to the bell tower. The steps were stone, worn smooth by years of ringing. Constable Pulk followed behind, his boots echoing against the walls. Below, Lady Bantry waited, staring up toward the rafters where cobwebs trembled in the draught. The air grew cooler as they reached the belfry. Dust lay thick across the wooden beams, and a faint smell of metal and old rope hung heavy. Miss Marple moved carefully, her eyes tracing every surface. "There," she said softly. "Look at the clock face." The constable turned toward the mechanism. The great clock stood still, its hands frozen at 9:15 p.m. Pulk frowned. "Stopped dead. Must have jammed sometime last night." "Not jammed," Marple corrected gently. "Stopped." She pointed to the winding lever. "It was set by hand." He squinted closer. "You mean someone stopped it on purpose?" "Exactly so," she said. "And not by accident. Look, the pendulum's weight is tied with a bit of cord. Whoever did this wanted the clock to be silent." She turned toward the bell rope hanging from the ceiling. It swayed faintly, though no wind touched it. Marple reached out, pulling gently. The rope strained for a second, then snapped halfway up with a soft hiss of frayed fibers. Lady Bantry gasped from below. "Jane, are you all right?" "Quite," Marple called down, "though our bell will not be ringing for some time." Constable Pulk bent over the broken rope. The end was not torn, but cleanly cut. He rubbed it between his fingers. Knife edge. Fresh, too. Whoever did this wasn't clumsy. "No," Marple murmured. "They were deliberate." The old woman looked up toward the bell above them, a dark shape against the rafters. "The clock stopped at 9:15, she said slowly. "When the rope was cut, no one below could have heard the bell. No chime, no warning." "And that was the same hour," Pulk added. "Lady Bantry saw smoke rising from her chimney that shouldn't have been burning." Marple nodded. "Yes, the fire that burned the letter." She glanced toward the narrow window overlooking the village. From that height, one could see both the church roof and the chimneys of Gossington Hall, their distance small enough to judge by the same clock. "Someone planned silence," she said quietly. "Silence at the very moment the smoke began." The constable frowned. "But why?" "So that no one would notice the time," Marple replied. "Or so that someone could act unseen, knowing the bell would not betray them." She lifted a fragment of the cut rope, turning it in the light. The hemp was sticky, faint traces of wax again, pressed along the fibers. Pulk's brow creased. "Wax? Here?" "Yes," Marple said. The same red again. Someone sealed this cut, to keep the rope from fraying thoughtful work. Lady Bantry climbed the first few steps, voice trembling. "Jane, what does it mean?" "It means," Marple said softly, "our mystery is timed to the second, and whoever planned it wanted no one to hear what they were doing." She looked once more at the frozen hands of the clock. The evening light caught on the brass dial, making the numbers gleam faintly like blood. Marple's expression hardened. 9:15, she whispered. "The hour the fire burned and the bell should have rung." The constable followed her gaze, uneasy. "Then whoever did this was standing here last night?" "Yes," said Marple. "Standing right here, listening to silence." A gust of wind stirred through the open slit of the tower window. Far below, the fields shimmered in the dying Sunday, and in that breath of air, the bell rope swayed once, though no hand touched it. Miss Marple's eyes followed its slow movement. "They didn't want the village to hear," she murmured, "because the sound would have told us when the crime began." The vestry smelled faintly of ink and candle grease when Miss Marple returned the next morning. The vicar sat at his desk, peering anxiously at the great leather-bound donation ledger spread open before him. He looked up as she entered, relief in his tired eyes. Ah, Miss Marple, perhaps you can make sense of this, he said. I found it like this when I came in at 8. He pushed the heavy book toward her. A dark scorch mark spread across the right-hand page, its edges crisp and brown. The paper had blackened in a narrow line, as if something hot had been laid upon it. The damage ended precisely at one entry. Donation Mrs. Ashton. Marple leaned over the desk, her spectacles catching the light. Not a random burn, she murmured. The rest of the page is untouched. The vicar sighed. That's what puzzles me. I've no recollection of this scorch. I keep no candles so near the desk. Lady Bantry, standing beside her, frowned at the page. Could it have caught fire from a match? Matches burn irregularly, Marple replied. This was drawn across. See the evenness? As if from a metal edge, perhaps a sealing tool heated too long. She pointed with the tip of her knitting needle. Here, the figure beside the name. It reads £10 now. What did you record originally? The vicar hesitated. 5. Mrs. Ashton gave 5. Then someone doubled her generosity, Marple said mildly, with your own pen. She studied the ink. It gleamed faintly purple fresh compared to the other entries. And whoever wrote it used a heavy hand. See the pressure marks? The nib cut deeper than yours ever would. The vicar looked stricken. Then my records have been altered. Indeed. And to make it appear as though Mrs. Ashton had contributed more than she did. For whose benefit, I wonder? Marple turned another page. Several other entries bore faint smudges near the margins, nothing overt but enough to suggest tampering. She lifted the blotter. Underneath lay a thin scrap of waxed paper, slightly curled at the corner, and a faint ring of red. She held it to the light. Used to seal envelopes, she murmured. Our friend with the church wax has been busy again. The vicar rubbed his forehead. But who would Mrs. Ashton herself? Possibly, Marple said, or someone who wished to protect her. Fraud can be written as neatly as faith, Reverend. Lady Bantry's voice trembled. Jane, you think this all connects to Lydia Field? Marple closed the ledger gently. We cannot say yet, but the same hand that sealed the warning that cut the bell rope and burned the letter has now turned to ink. She looked around the small vestry, tidy, silent, betraying nothing. Then her eyes rested on the pen tray beside the ledger. 3 nibs lay in a neat row, but the middle one was darker, its tip clotted with something hardened and dull. She picked it up carefully. The vicar leaned forward. Ink? Marple rubbed the residue between her gloved fingers. It flaked slightly, not ink, but something heavier, waxier. She brought it closer to the light, her voice low. Not ink, Reverend. Sealing wax red. Lady Bantry stared. But who would dip a pen in wax? Marple's eyes lifted, calm and sharp. Someone, she said, who wished to disguise the color of what they'd written. She turned the nib toward the window. The wax caught the sunlight, glowing faintly crimson. Someone who writes, she whispered, and burns, with the same hand. Outside, the bell tower loomed silent against the sky. The vicar's clock struck once a hollow note in the quiet. Marple placed the pen back on the tray, eyes narrowing. Whoever touched this nib, she said softly, signed their guilt in red. The afternoon sun fell gently through the lace curtains of the vicarage drawing-room, touching the polished tea set with quiet gold. Miss Marple sat in her usual chair, knitting idle in her lap. Lady Bantry poured the tea, but her eyes kept flicking toward the door. They were waiting for Mrs. Ashton. A few minutes later, the housekeeper showed her in a woman of about 50, elegantly dressed in dove grey, her hat trimmed modestly with ribbon. She carried herself with poise, and yet her eyes seemed to move too carefully as though measuring each detail of the room before she spoke. Miss Marple, she said warmly, what a pleasure to see you again. And, dear Lady Bantry, it's been far too long. Her voice was smooth, practiced, pleasant. She smiled easily, but the smile never quite reached her eyes. Tea? Lady Bantry offered. Just a little, thank you. As she sat, a faint scent drifted across the table, lavender, sweet and familiar. But beneath it lingered something sharper. Smoke. Marple's head tilted slightly. A most comforting perfume, she said. I remember it from years ago when you lived near the rectory, wasn't it? Mrs. Ashton smiled. Indeed. My late husband was churchwarden then. Poor man always in the vestry. Marple's eyes flicked briefly to the vicar's desk in the corner, where the ledger still lay closed. Then you must know how carefully the records were kept. Oh, quite, said Mrs. Ashton, stirring her tea. He was meticulous. Lady Bantry's tone was gentle but probing. And you, my dear, still active in parish work? Mrs. Ashton laughed softly. As much as I can bear. One does what one can. I've sent small donations now and then, but nothing of note. Marple leaned forward slightly. Curious, then, that your name appears in the latest ledger. £10. Quite generous. Mrs. Ashton blinked, then smiled again too quickly. Surely not. I haven't given 10 in years. Must be some mistake. Marple nodded mildly. Perhaps. Records do suffer from accidents, burns, smudges, the odd overzealous pen. Mrs. Ashton's gloved hand tightened on her teacup. Burns? Yes, said Marple softly. A page in the vicar's ledger was scorched last night, right through your entry. Silence fell. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily. Mrs. Ashton set her cup down, her smile frozen in place. I can't imagine how. I've not been near the church since Sunday. Her voice was calm, steady, just a shade too even. Marple's gaze rested on her gloved hand. Fine leather, pale beige, immaculate, except for one small blemish. Near the wrist, a faint circular burn mark marred the surface, a clean-edged circle, the size of a coin. Lady Bantry followed her gaze, eyes widening. Mrs. Ashton noticed and tucked her hand quickly beneath her other wrist. A silly thing, she said lightly. Touched the kettle this morning. Marple smiled gently. Ah, such accidents happen often, though seldom in so perfect a shape. Mrs. Ashton rose, adjusting her gloves. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must attend to my maid. She's frightfully forgetful. Of course, Marple said, her tone mild. One shouldn't leave things unattended. Not letters, not ledgers, not even keys. Mrs. Ashton paused at the doorway, her composure flawless. Good day, Miss Marple. You do have such a suspicious mind. Marple smiled again, faint but kind. And you, my dear, such careful hands. The door closed behind her. Lady Bantry exhaled. Jane, did you see it? Marple nodded slowly, eyes still on the teacup Mrs. Ashton had held. A faint smear of crimson wax clung to its rim. She took out her handkerchief and dabbed it lightly, folding the evidence away. Her voice dropped to a whisper. That mark on her glove, she said, wasn't from a kettle. It's the print of a church seal still warm when she touched it. The next afternoon, Miss Marple asked Mrs. Ashton to join her for tea in the quiet of the vicarage garden. It was a mild day, the air soft with the scent of lilacs. 2 cups sat ready on the small iron table between them, the kettle steaming gently. Mrs. Ashton arrived precisely on time, composed, gracious, every fold of her grey dress in perfect order. Her gloved hands rested lightly on her handbag, but her eyes moved with a certain guarded awareness. "How thoughtful of you, Miss Marple," she said. "I confess, after yesterday's discussion I slept rather poorly." "Indeed," Marple replied, pouring the tea. "I find poor sleep often visits those with unfinished thoughts." Mrs. Ashton smiled, though her expression flickered. "Perhaps, or perhaps I was simply troubled by that dreadful business with the charity box. Such deceit in a holy place." Marple stirred her cup slowly. Deceit, like ink, has a way of reappearing even when we think it gone. Mrs. Ashton blinked. "I beg your pardon?" Marple smiled faintly. "Invisible ink, my dear. Have you ever tried it? Lemon juice, applied lightly with a pen, leaves no trace until warmed. Rather clever, though it gives off a small scent when it dries." Mrs. Ashton hesitated, her teacup halfway to her lips. "Scent? Yes. Iodine and lemon mixed, faintly bitter. A most distinctive aroma." Marple leaned forward slightly. "I caught it yesterday when we examined the vicar's letter. Curious thing, it clung to the envelope even after the writing appeared." She looked directly at Mrs. Ashton. "You use lavender perfume, don't you? Such a charming fragrance. But it cannot quite hide the sharper notes beneath, can it? Mrs. Ashton set down her cup too quickly. The saucer rattled. She gave a nervous laugh. "My dear Miss Marple, you do have a suspicious imagination." "Perhaps," Marple said mildly, "but imagination is often just the mind arranging facts too small for others to see." A bee buzzed between them, circling the teapot, the only sound breaking the still air. Marple reached for her knitting bag and drew out the scorched photograph. Fragment. "Do you remember this?" she asked quietly. Mrs. Ashton's eyes dropped to it, and for the first time the composure slipped. "That's Lydia Field," she said, barely audible. "Yes," said Marple, "the nurse who vanished. And once, she was your husband's assistant in the vestry, was she not?" Mrs. Ashton's lips parted, but no words came. Marple continued softly. "She signed the ledger once, in your stead, and the handwriting identical to yours." Silence fell again, only the faint clink of porcelain and the slow rise of steam from the teapot. Mrs. Ashton's gloved hands trembled. "You think I think," Marple interrupted gently. "You wrote a warning that could not be posted. You tried to stop something before it was too late. But someone found out." Mrs. Ashton's cup shook in its saucer. A drop of tea spilled across the table, spreading slowly toward Marple's hand. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He shouldn't have found out." Marple's eyes narrowed. "He?" Mrs. Ashton's gaze darted toward the church tower beyond the hedge. Her breathing quickened. The wind stirred through the lilacs, carrying the faint echo of a bell rope swaying on its own. Mrs. Ashton rose suddenly, almost knocking her chair. "I must go," she said. "I've said too much already." She turned away, her figure stiff against the sunlight. Marple watched her go, calm and steady. The untouched cup of tea still steamed gently across the table, and in the rising mist, a faint trace of lemon drifted through the lavender. Marple leaned closer, eyes thoughtful. "He shouldn't have found out," Mrs. Ashton had said, and the word he hung in the garden air like smoke that refused to fade. Evening shadows stretched long across the vicarage drawing-room. The fire burned low, the air thick with quiet expectation. Lady Bantry sat near the mantel, hands clasped tight. Constable Pulk stood behind her, notebook ready. At the center of it all sat Mrs. Ashton, pale, rigid, her gloved hands folded in her lap. Miss Marple faced her calmly, knitting untouched beside the tea tray. Her voice, when it came, was gentle but precise. "Let us begin with the letter, Mrs. Ashton, the one written in invisible ink. It was never sent, was it?" Mrs. Ashton's lips parted, but no sound emerged. Marple continued softly. "Because there was no one to send it to. You wrote it yourself." The silence deepened. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hesitate between ticks. "You feared discovery," Marple went on. "The vicar's ledger had been altered small sums at first, then larger ones. Donations duplicated. You'd been handling the parish collections, yes?" Mrs. Ashton's eyes flickered. "For years. The vicar trusted me." "I'm sure he did," said Marple. But when he began balancing the accounts, he noticed discrepancies. A 10 became 20. A 5 became 10. He said nothing at first. Clergymen are patient men. She leaned forward slightly. But last week he marked one entry, Mrs. Ashton, £10. The figure was not his hand. He meant to speak with you after Wednesday's meeting. Mrs. Ashton's composure cracked. "I only borrowed it," she whispered. "Just until the end of the month. I meant to repay." "You forged his writing," Marple said quietly, then realized he had seen it. "So you created the illusion of an outside threat, the letter beginning, 'Stop her before Thursday.' You hoped the vicar would believe you were being blackmailed. That would explain the missing money. And if the letter burned, so would the evidence." Lady Bantry's voice trembled. "And she burned it here, in my grate." Marple nodded. "Yes. After midnight. You used sealing wax from the vestry to make it seem official. The fire consumed most of it, but a fragment drifted into your teapot by morning. Fate, my dear, has a fine sense of irony." Mrs. Ashton bowed her head. "I never meant harm. I only wanted to put things right before anyone knew. Which, said Marple gently, is precisely what you failed to do. She rose, moving to the desk. The half-burned photograph lay under glass Lydia Field. The nurse long vanished. You see, Marple continued, the photograph puzzled me most. Lydia's image burned, her brooch returned, and your initials carved beneath the ashes. I believe she discovered your deception years ago, when she assisted in the accounts. And the accident that took her, perhaps not an accident after all. Mrs. Ashton covered her face with her hands. I didn't push her, she whispered, but she threatened to expose me. The fall. It happened so quickly. Marple's tone remained calm. And now history repeats itself. You wrote another warning to protect yourself once more. Constable Polk closed his notebook. That's confession enough for me. Mrs. Ashton looked up sharply. No, I never meant it to go so far. No one knew I was in the library that night. No one saw me. Marple's gaze was steady. You're mistaken. Mrs. Ashton froze. What? Someone saw you, Marple said quietly. Someone who cleaned the grate the next morning and burned what remained. A girl with a blister on her wrist. The room fell utterly still. Even the fire gave no sound. Mrs. Ashton's eyes widened, her voice dropping to a whisper. Ellen. Marple nodded once. Yes, Mrs. Ashton. The maid saw everything. The clock struck 8, the chime echoing through the vicarage. Marple's voice was soft but final. And now, she said, she's ready to tell us what you tried so hard to hide. The kitchen of Gossington Hall had never felt so cold. Ellen Briggs sat at the table, her apron bunched in her fists, eyes red from tears. Inspector Slack stood at the door, arms folded, expression unreadable. Lady Bantry hovered behind Miss Marple, who sat opposite the trembling maid with her calm knitting hands folded in her lap. Marple's voice was gentle, almost grandmotherly. My dear, we only ask you to tell the truth. No one wishes you harm. Ellen shook her head, words catching in her throat. I didn't mean to keep quiet, ma'am. I was scared. Of what child? Marple asked softly. Ellen swallowed hard. Of them saying it was me. The letter, the fire, the mess in the library. It all looked like I'd done it. She twisted her apron tighter, the fabric trembling. I came down early that morning, before the Bantrys were up. I saw the glow from the grate, thought maybe a log had caught. But when I looked closer, I saw Mrs. Ashton crouched there, feeding paper into the fire. She turned when she heard me. Said it was just rubbish. Old church notices. Lady Bantry gasped. And you believed her? Ellen nodded miserably. She told me to fetch kindling and not to speak of it. I didn't want trouble. Then she gave me £50 and said I'd done a good job tidying. Marple leaned closer, her voice low. And the next day, Ellen's eyes brimmed. Constable Polk came asking about ashes. I thought if I told the truth, they'd say I helped her. That's why I burned what was left, that bit of paper she dropped by the hearth. I only meant to make it neat. Inspector Slack stepped forward. So you destroyed evidence? The girl flinched. Yes, sir, but I swear I didn't know it was important. From the doorway came the firm sound of heels on tile. Mrs. Ashton entered, pale, her composure gone. You little fool, she hissed. You promised you'd say nothing. Ellen shrank back, tears spilling. I'm sorry, ma'am. I can't lie any more. Slack raised a hand. That's enough, Mrs. Ashton. He stepped forward, voice cold. You're under arrest for fraud and obstruction. Anything you say. Mrs. Ashton drew herself upright, her voice breaking. I didn't mean harm. I only wanted to put things right before it was found out. Marple's expression softened, though her words remained firm. Deception never rights itself, my dear. It only hides for a while like embers beneath ash. Slack led the widow toward the door, his boots heavy on the stone floor. Ellen covered her face, sobbing. She said she'd make it right, ma'am. I didn't know she'd go so far. Marple reached across the table, taking the girl's trembling hand. Courage, child. The truth always burns cleanest, even when it hurts. As she spoke, her eyes dropped to Ellen's wrist, the faint scar still red from a recent blister. The shape of it stopped her breath for a moment. A small round welt, perfectly circular, the size and curve of a brass poker handle. Marple's knitting hands stilled. She looked up slowly. "Tell me, my dear," she said softly, "when you burned those ashes, did you use the poker to stir them?" Ellen's face went white. I don't remember, ma'am." Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the mark, too neat, too deliberate to be chance. The fire hissed faintly behind them, a single ember still glowing red. Lady Bantry shivered. "Jane, what is it?" Marple straightened, her tone measured. "Not all truth, my dear Dolly, rises easily from ash." Her eyes shifted toward the fire, watching the final ember fade. "Some truths," she whispered, still burned quietly, waiting to be found. The evening had settled deep and calm over Street Mary Mead. Rain tapped gently against the panes of Gossington Hall. The fire, newly lit, glowed steady in the grate, soft, golden, and unhurried. Miss Marple sat close to it, her knitting basket by her side, though her needles lay still. Her eyes followed the flames as if reading a quiet story within them. Lady Bantry entered, carrying a silver tray. The sound of the teapot lid chimed softly as she set it down. "Milk?" she asked. "Just a drop," Marple said. They sat together for a moment without speaking, the kind of silence that belongs to endings not heavy, just final. Lady Bantry poured the tea and sighed. "I can hardly believe it, Jane. All that deceit, and right under our noses." Marple smiled faintly. "Deceit seldom hides far, my dear. It sits in plain view, disguised as good manners." The flames shifted, throwing patterns across the hearthrug. Marple leaned back, her voice quiet. Mrs. Ashton meant only to delay the truth, not destroy it. But lies, once kindled, burn faster than any fire one can control. Lady Bantry stirred her cup. Still, she might have escaped if Ellen hadn't spoken. "Yes," Marple agreed softly. "Fear binds the guilty and the innocent alike. But courage, even from a frightened maid, has its own light." A log cracked in the fire, sending up a brief shower of sparks. Marple watched them fade into grey. "Some lies burn bright," she said, her tone almost tender, "but they leave the room colder." Lady Bantry looked at her friend thoughtfully. "And you, Jane? You never seem surprised by wickedness. Only patient with it." Marple smiled. "We must be, Dolly. Wickedness is only truth gone astray. Given time and a little air, it finds its way home." Outside, the rain softened to mist. Inside, the warmth spread again, as though peace had tiptoed back into the house. Marple reached for her teacup, her eyes still on the fire. "And yet," she added gently, "the ashes always spell the truth if one knows how to read them." The two women sat in silence after that, the kind of silence that brings closure, not emptiness. The clock on the mantel chimed 8. Marple rose, smoothing her skirt. "Now, Dolly, I think I'll walk home before the puddles grow too bold." Lady Bantry smiled. "And leave me here alone with my conscience?" Marple chuckled softly. "It's a friendly companion if you keep it warm." She paused at the doorway, turning back once. The firelight caught her silver hair, haloed in glow. Then she was gone, her footsteps fading into the hush of rain, and from somewhere the soft, familiar voice of the host. "Thank you for listening, dear friends. Until our next mystery."